details entirely. I want you to picture this. You're out at a restaurant having a bite to eat. It's a steakhouse. You're having a steak, and suddenly in come some protesters. This happened in Brighton on Saturday night. Argus reports that Brighton members of Direct Action Everywhere, an international grassroots network of animal rights activists, entered Turo Steakhouse in West Street. About 20 of them held signs with photos of animals that were being served up in the steakhouse with placards saying, "It's not food, it's violence," and "Until every animal is free." One of the activists gave a speech urging customers to question their food, saying, and you heard this in the clip, or hopefully you were able to make it out, no good person could look into the eyes of an animal and think that a meal was more important than their suffering. The vegans then played a recorded audio of animals being slaughtered in an attempt to put people off eating, said the Argus. The activists stood around the restaurant with the animal recordings, making customers, quote, listen to their screams. According to the Daily Mail, some diners booed and jeered, and one made the sound of a cow mooing. We're going to talk about that now with Matthew McKeefrey, who speaks for Direct Action Everywhere, the organisation which organised the demonstration in Brighton. Hi, Matthew, how are you?
Hi, Eddie, I'm great, thanks.
Thanks very much for doing this for us. Now, I know you weren't there, and neither was I. Was the description of the Brighton Argus, was that pretty accurate as to what happened?
So what happened on Saturday was members of our network, Direct Action Everywhere, entered a steakhouse and spoke out for the animals who were killed and whose bodies were being served in the steakhouse. And the reason we're doing this is because we know that unpopular but effective protest movements has, been effective in creating change. And we know ordinary people don't want to harm animals. So by calling attention to the underlying violence to what's really happening, we're bringing attention to each and every animal who suffered for this restaurant and restaurants like it around the world and the country.
Which other protest movements do you have in mind when you talk about the tactics that you and your friends are using?
Well, at Direct Action Everywhere, we have looked at other non-violent protest movements.
Such as?
Such as the suffragettes, Martin Luther King, and even more recent protest movements like ACT UP and Black Lives Matter. And what we can see is by taking non-violent protest, we are forcing a conversation to happen with society as a whole. So, we're not angry at the individuals in the steakhouse or any individual who eats animals or animal products, but what we aren't happy about is the fact that animals are being killed, and we're not directing our anger at individuals, we're directing our anger at the system instead. And just like those protest movements I mentioned before, by talking about this issue, by talking about what's really happening, we know that the public care about animals, and it might take time, but everyone one day will agree that every animal deserves to be safe, happy, and free.
Everyone will one day agree.
Yeah, I strongly believe that by showing that pigs are the same as dogs, and even the same as us in all the ways that matter, in our capabilities to feel pain, to feel fear, to feel happiness, to want to be with our friends and family. We're all equal and we're all the same in those ways. And, we aren't taught to think about that as children. And it's this systemic violence to animals that's the problem here. It's not individuals that's the problem. It's this normalization of violence towards non-human animals that's the issue, and that's what we're protesting against.
Would it be understandable, though, Matthew, if people who were in that restaurant or any other in similar circumstances did feel that they were being attacked and shouted at for their legitimate legal choices you disagree with, but they might well have felt on the receiving end of being shouted at when they were just having a meal?
I think that, while, as you said, it might be legal, that doesn't necessarily mean it's right. The laws reflect what's currently accepted as okay, and that's what we want to achieve. We want to achieve legal change for animals, where animals are no longer seen as property, and we also want to change society's attitudes.
But I wonder if this is the right method.
Yeah, this is how we can start a conversation about how animals deserve to be free, because, we wouldn't do this to a dog. If a dog was being killed in a slaughterhouse in the UK and we were to serve their bodies in a restaurant, people would be horrified at that. And the reason people would be horrified is because dogs, we know what dogs are like. They have their own personalities, they feel pain,
But many people would take a different view of this. Many people would see dogs differently from cows and pigs and sheep. Now, you don't, but they do. And they've made the choice that I'm sure they would want animal welfare standards to be as high as possible, for animals to be treated humanely as possible. And of course, that's a related but different argument. But ultimately, they would say humans have been eating meat for generations, for just about as long as humans have been around, and they don't want to be shouted at in restaurants.
Yeah, there's been other issues throughout history where we have done things that aren't necessarily okay, and we are progressing as a society, and this is an issue we need to change, because you mentioned there that many people don't see dogs in the same way they see pigs and cows, and that's because as young children we're told that pigs are okay to be eaten, but dogs, we love and we share our hopes.
But it's also a conclusion that adults reach.
Yeah, of course, that's because we're told from a young age, and we're told this throughout our lives, that some animals are, okay to harm and exploit, while others are not. And it's this normalization of violence to animals that's the issue. We're told that it's okay, and most people wouldn't be okay with this if they knew what happened in a slaughterhouse. If we had to kill animals ourselves, most people would not do that, because we want animals to be free. We care about animals as a nation. And humans, we do care about animals, and we don't want harm to come to anyone. And you mentioned there, most people believe in animal welfare, and I would agree with that. And that's because people don't want animals to be harmed, but ultimately there's no humane way to exploit or kill someone who doesn't want to die.
Do you worry, Matthew, that these demonstrations might put people off veganism?
Well, I think some people, might not agree with us initially, and that's okay. We don't expect everyone to agree with us initially, or even the next decade for everyone to just suddenly agree with animal rights. This is going to be an issue we're going to be fighting for years to come.
Are we going to see more of these demonstrations?
Yeah, certainly. We're going to see more activists speaking up for animals, and the reason we're going to see a growth in the animal rights movement is because as people become aware to what's happening to animals, as we, undo our social condition as children that animals are ours to use, we're going to become aware to what's happening to animals, and we're going to want to speak up, which is why we're seeing a growth in the animal rights movement, because the public care about animals. The public don't want animals to be harmed. That's why we're seeing more and more of these demonstrations happening, because we're aligning our values with our actions. We don't want animals to be harmed, and by taking action, we're aligning our values with our actions.
Very good to hear from you. Thanks for doing that for us, Matthew McKeefrey, who speaks for Direct Action Everywhere. What about you? 0345 6060 973 on Twitter. I'm a vegan. I don't